Gives me great pleasure to introduce to you guys a lady by the name of Claire Culwell. She is an international pro-life speaker. She's the author of a book called Survivor, an abortion survivor's surprising story of choosing forgiveness and finding redemption. She has been featured on Fox News, Focus on the Family, and in the Creation Museum. Claire lives on a small homestead in East Texas with her husband David and their children, where they raise animals. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you guys right now, Claire Culwell.
Well, you heard it. I'm from Texas, so howdy. Do y'all have any stereotypes about Texans? Well, I might fit the bill. I do wake up every morning and milk my goat. But it is just wonderful to be here with all of you. I am so honored to get to be here in support of the work of Esther House. I'm so incredibly grateful for what you are doing here. I truly believe that what you're doing is life or death for somebody like me. And for those of you who maybe haven't seen the commercial that featured my story here in Ohio or don't know my story, that'll make sense in a minute. But anyway, I think you'll agree with me that we are living in a culture in desperate need of hope, right? I mean, you can turn on the TV, you can talk to your kids, you can see what's going on with the war. You can read this ballot, read this constitutional amendment and what it says, as you heard tonight, and we're in desperate need of hope. And I've been encouraged tonight as I've listened to what the Esther House is doing, what these ministries for post-abortive women are doing, because they are truly giving hope to a community, to a culture that is in desperate need of hope. And so tonight, as you hear my testimony, I want you to think about something, because I believe that every single one of us here tonight, we get to choose. We get to choose whether we are going to enter into that with them and be hope givers in our communities to the people that are suffering, that are dealing with these crisis pregnancies, that don't know where to turn. We get to be the answer in their moment of crisis. We get to give hope. And I believe that it takes a very specific type of person, a type of person that we get to choose to be every single day, that gives that hope. And that is a person of integrity, a person who stands for truth and wisdom, who isn't ashamed of who God created us to be. And he created every single one of us to be set apart from this world. And a person who has confidence in disappointment, because we can trust the God who goes before us. As you'll hear tonight, I never planned to stand on a stage and tell my testimony. I am 100% an introvert. I have to pray before I get up here, just that God will give me the strength to do it again. But God has called me out of my comfort zone to choose to be that very specific type of person. And tonight, I believe that he's calling you too. And so as you hear my testimony, I hope that number one, you'll think about what that looks like for you. But number two, that you'll know that my story can be your story too, because God can and will redeem and restore your life. I grew up as an adopted child. My sister and I are both adopted, and we had an incredible life as adopted children. It was actually our normal. My sister and I got to elementary school and junior high and high school, and we remember being so confused when kids would come up to us and say, "Gosh, we're so sorry you're adopted," or "What was it like at the orphanage?" That wasn't our story. That is somebody's story, but it wasn't our story. And we were so confused because adoption was our normal. It was such a positive thing. And I think it's because, when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, everybody had seen the movie Annie, and they thought that we lived with Miss Hannigan. But all we knew to be true about ourselves were three things: that we were wanted, chosen, and loved. Those were things that our parents spoke over us, not only because they believed those things about us, but they said that God said those things about us, that we were wanted, chosen, and loved. And we knew we had birth mothers. We didn't know if and when they would become a part of our story one day. We didn't know the circumstances behind our birth stories or adoption stories, but we knew that we were grateful for the life that they gave us, for the family that they gave us. And so if that opportunity arose that we would meet our birth mothers, that everything would be okay because we were wanted, chosen, and loved. So adoption was something we talked about in our family all the time, but abortion wasn't. And so I think if you had asked me in junior high and high school, even some of college, if I ever thought that I would be the type of person who would be impacted by abortion, I would have said absolutely not. The type of person who's been affected by abortion is not somebody like me. They were not raised in a solid Christian ministry home like mine. They do not live in my neighborhood. They are not a part of my extended family. They do not go to my school. The type of person who's been impacted by abortion is not somebody like me. But I realized a few years ago when I met my birth mother that everything I believed about the type of person who's been affected by abortion was wrong because it was me. In college, I was studying to be a nurse. As I mentioned, I am 100% an introvert, and so my plan for my life was not to talk to, 200 of you. It was to be a home care nurse one-on-one with people. But God has a sense of humor and had bigger and better plans for my life. And so in college, as I was studying to be a nurse, I would drive past this building, and I didn't know what it was. All I knew was that it was a medical clinic, and there were people outside, and they were standing in front, lined up, looked like they were staring, praying. I didn't know. And so one day I stopped and I asked them what they were doing, and they told me that this was a Planned Parenthood and that they knew what abortion is and what it does, not only to a child, but to a mother and to a family, that they believed that these women were worthy of walking alongside of, that they were capable of motherhood, that there were resources for them. They were there to pray for them. They were also there to point them in the direction of places like pregnancy resource centers and Esther House, a home for them to go to that would provide the resources that they needed. And so I thought, wow, this is great. Like, I agree with every single thing that y'all are saying. I agree with what you're doing, but I'm an introvert. I hate controversy. And so I wiped my hands clean that day, and I thought, that will never be me. Y'all can do that, but that will never be me. I will never talk about the two most offensive words in the dictionary, Jesus and abortion, together. I will never pray outside of an abortion facility. But I look back, and that was my first glimpse of God's bigger picture and of his bigger plan for my life, because I would go back to those same people just a few months later and tell them that I had just met my birth mother and I had found out that I am the type of person who's been affected by abortion. Around that time, my sister met her birth mother, and I remember the visit like it was yesterday. It was the first time I really thought about my birth mother as I looked at my sister and her birth mother together and saw how much they looked alike and acted alike. I was able to recognize what my sister's birth mother had done for us. She had given me my sister. She had completed our family. I was so grateful for that. I was able to hear her story about being 30 years old and could have easily raised my sister, but she made the selfless and loving choice to place my sister for adoption so that my sister could have a dad. And so I heard all these things, and I saw her. Sorry, I don't know why it keeps going out. If there's another one, if it keeps going out, we'll get another one. But I saw them together, and it made me appreciate my birth mother. And I was 20 at this point. I had not really thought much about my birth mother, but I decided I wanted to have that conversation with my family. And so we did, and we agreed that we wanted the opportunity to hopefully meet my birth mother. And so my birth mother actually lived at a home similar to Esther House called Deaconess Home, an adoption agency in Oklahoma City. And so I called the adoption agency up on the phone, and a woman named Debbie answered my call, and I told her my name, and I told her that I longed to meet my birth mother, but at least Even if she didn't want to meet me, I wanted to thank her for giving me my life and my family, the same things that my sister's birth mother had given to her. And I finished, and she said, Claire, this is going to sound really strange, and it did. She said, Claire, I actually know exactly who you are. She said, you were a very special baby for me. I was actually your birth mother's caseworker 21 years ago. She said, I've had your baby picture on my desk for the past 21 years. And she said, you have these little casts on your feet and this harness on your hips. I remember all the health complications you had as a baby. I want you to know that your birth mother was very young, and I want you to know that she loved you very much, and I will do everything I can to find her. And I hung up the phone thinking, yeah, that is the strangest thing I've ever heard. Like, why my baby picture for 21 years? Out of all the babies that she's probably helped, all the birth mothers that she's helped place for. But I look back now and I realize that that's my second glimpse of God's bigger picture and of his bigger plan for my life, because she knew what I didn't know. She knew that my life was a miracle. She called me that Christmas Eve and gave me the greatest Christmas present I've still ever received. She said, Claire, your birth mother would love to meet you. And so we set that meeting up, and we met in Dallas, in between where she lives and where I live in Texas. It was this incredible meeting. I remember the moment I opened the door and looked at her, and we looked alike and we acted alike, and it was just this incredible experience. I remember my sister saying, now we know why you're a whole 4'11". But I enjoyed it so much. I was able to bring my family, and she was able to meet my family, and I was able to meet hers. I have 3 half-sisters through her, and it was just incredible. But we didn't get that moment, the moment where I wanted it to just be me and her, where I could thank her for my life, thank her for sacrificially loving me enough to give me my parents, because I knew that she had been so young. And so we set a second meeting up, and this time I flew to Oklahoma, and I brought a gift with me, and it was a ring and a necklace with my birthstone on it, and I had a card with the gift, and for whatever reason, all I wrote on that card was, thank you for choosing life for me. And I got there that day, and I thought, this is going to be our moment, and I am going to tear down every lie that she believes about herself, that maybe she wasn't a good enough mother because she placed me for adoption. I wanted her to know that she was the best mother for me because of what she had given me. And so I was so excited that night. I got there and I gave her the gifts, and I gave her the ring and the necklace, and she cried really happy tears, and I thought, this is it. And then she read the words on the card, and she read the words, thank you for choosing life for me. And everything in the room changed in that moment. I mean, what were happy tears from receiving the ring and the necklace instantly turned into sad tears. And I can't even describe to you today what I saw when I looked into her eyes, because it was the deepest pain I have ever seen, still to this day, in anyone's eyes, as she kept repeating, Claire, I didn't choose life for you. Your life is a miracle. I'm so sorry. I didn't. I'm so sorry. She said, I have something to tell you. And I was so confused. I mean, I thought this was going to be our moment. And yet I was met with pain and agony and something that I knew I had never experienced. The look in her eye, I knew I had never known a pain like that. And yet here I was trying to thank my birth mother as she kept apologizing. And then she continued, and what she told me changed the course of my life forever. She said, Claire, I was 13 years old when I was pregnant with you. 13 years old, and her mother told her that abortion was the best choice for her. And my birth mother did. She had an abortion while she was pregnant with me. She had a late-term abortion while she was pregnant with me. In a room with a doctor, with nurses, who never spoke to her, who never asked her what her choice would have been, who never empowered her to know that she could do it, that she was worthy of walking alongside of, that she was strong enough to be a mother, that she was capable, that there were resources for her. No, they told her that this was the best thing for her, that she could go home, go back to 8th grade, pretend like it never happened. And she said, Claire, I couldn't. It's the most agonizing moment of my birth mother's life, the most painful procedure, she described to me. And so she went home and she tried to get back to normal, but things weren't right. And she went back to the doctor, and the doctors told her that they had made a mistake, that the abortion that aborted my twin's body, that actually tore my twin's body apart limb by limb, as you saw in that procedure, that it had accidentally missed my body and that I had survived. I learned that day as my birth mother told me that I had survived her late-term D&E abortion and that I was a twinless twin. And my birth mother described after the abortion that successfully aborted my twin, she described as her mother had taken her back to that doctor, that her mother told the doctor that she needed a second abortion, and an even later term abortion. She was furious. She was abusive to my birth mother. And the doctors said, okay, we'll send you to Kansas where you can get this second late-term abortion because we can't do it here in Oklahoma. Our laws don't allow it. But in Kansas, you can get that. So an even later term abortion than what you saw on the screen, my birth mother was driven to Kansas for by her mother. And once again, surrounded by a doctor and nurses who never once asked her what her choice would have been, never spoke to her, never acknowledged her. They were ready to give her that second late-term abortion. But something miraculous happened in that room. They examined my birth mother, and they said that because the abortion that aborted my twin had ripped the amniotic sac that I was in, that my birth mother was leaking that amniotic fluid, and it was too risky for her to have a second late-term abortion. And so they turned her away. Otherwise, they would have aborted me too. And so my birth mother then was dropped off at this adoption agency / maternity home, similar to Esther House in Oklahoma. And her mother dropped her off, never came back until after she delivered me and after I had been placed for adoption. I was born at 10 weeks premature. I weighed 3 pounds, 2 ounces. My hip was dislocated. My feet were turned in as club feet. I was on life support for 2 months in the hospital. And up until I was 2 years old, I went through multiple body casts as the doctors corrected these complications that my birth mother was told were caused by this abortion. I was a patient at the Dallas Children's Crippled Hospital until I was 18, and I still have complications today. As you can imagine, finding out that I survived my birth mother's abortion was unlike anything I ever thought would come out of my birth mother's mouth. I mean, it is the most shocking, life-altering moment of my life as I realize that my birth story is what it is. And so I went into the room that I was sleeping in Tanya's, my birth mother, her name's Tanya. I went into this room in her house and began to try to process what I had just heard. But how do you process that you were aborted? How do you process that you're a twinless twin? I didn't know. And so I did what I always do in my moment of crisis, and I called home. I called my parents, and what they said to me that night on the phone changed my perspective about my circumstances. They said, Claire, God's fingerprints are all over your life. He must have a really big plan for you. You get to choose to trust God. Imagine what he will do if you're willing. You see, my new reality in that room that night was that I was an abortion survivor. I was a twinless twin. I am unwanted, I am rejected, and I am even aborted. Those are my circumstances. Every day I wake up, those will still be my circumstances. But as I called home, and my feet were back on solid ground as my parents reminded me that my circumstances are not what define me. I am defined by what God says about me, the words that my parents spoke over me. Wanted, chosen, and loved. And so I had a choice that night as I laid my head down on the pillow in my birth mother's house and knew who I was while still trying to figure out the circumstances that were so shocking, that were so heartbreaking, that were so hurtful. I had a choice to make. And I knew the next day she told me I was going to meet her mother and I was going to meet the rest of her family. And I was going to have the opportunity to choose. And I chose to forgive my birth mother. I chose to forgive her mother. I chose to forgive anybody that knew about these circumstances. And my birth mother, she has told me time and time again that she fully expected me to run out of the room that day and never look back. That's what she thought I would do. Her words in an interview after my book came out a couple years ago, she said, "Claire, I aborted your twin. Then I tried to abort you, and then when that didn't work, I gave you away. How could you ever love or forgive me?" But I was raised on love and grace and forgiveness. And instead of running from Tanya, God, somehow he intervened and he gave me his heart for my birth mother, because I knew that all those things that my parents spoke over me, that God said about me, that he said about her too. And what Jesus did for me on the cross, he did for her too. And so I was able to forgive my birth mother. And I went home and I went back to Texas and I began to process and talk to my parents. I knew I forgave my birth mother, but I didn't know where to start. I didn't know what to do with this information. And we were surrounded by people that it wasn't our thing to talk about abortion. It was awkward as I began to tell people, like, I met my birth mother and found out I survived her abortion. And so the only thing I knew to do was go back to the people on the sidewalk. And I did. I went back to the people on the sidewalk. It was actually the Planned Parenthood that Abby Johnson ran. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but she ran an abortion clinic for 8 years. And after seeing an ultrasound-guided abortion, saw what it did to the baby's body, left the abortion industry, and has now spoken out for the same amount of time I have about what she experienced inside of the abortion industry. And so I walked up to those people, and it just so happened that Abby had left her job 2 weeks before. And so they introduced Abby and I. So Abby, a former abortion clinic director, was my first friend in the pro-life movement and one of the first people I told. And Abby, along with the people that had been praying outside of that abortion facility, they cried with me. And they saw the impact that my story could have. And they said, "Claire, you should share it." And I thought, there is no way. You know, I am an introvert. I should have known they were going to say that. But I thought, no, I was coming here so that you could share it with these women walking into the doors. But they said, "No, Claire, just pray about it. We really think God could use your story. We really think that kids and people in general could see the humanity of the unborn child through your life, through your existence." And they kept asking and they kept asking. And I finally said, "Okay, I'll do it," to this small youth group. And I did. And I watched as I shared my story. And I was terrible at it the first time. But I shared my story, and I watched as the light bulbs went off in these kids' heads. These were 7th and 8th and 9th and 10th graders, as they recognized the humanity of the unborn child through my existence. And I said, "Okay, God, if you keep asking, I will say yes." And joke's on me, because he's asked me about 20 to 30 times a year since then. But I do believe that God gave me my story for such a time as this, so that we can all know the face and the name and the story of the aborted child, like my twin, like me, but Also, so that we can know the face and the name and the story of the woman like my birth mother who's desperately looking for someone to simply say, you can do it. Because that's what she told me. If somebody had walked alongside her, if somebody had pointed her in the direction of Esther House, if somebody had educated her parents to know that they were not alone, that they were supported as well, that she would have never had an abortion. I mentioned Abby earlier, and how many of you have seen her movie, Unplanned, the movie about her life story? Okay, not very many of you. So they made a movie about Abby's conversion from directing an abortion clinic to now being outspokenly for life, against abortion. It is life-changing if you have a chance to watch it. And I mentioned that I became friends with Abby shortly after I met my birth mother. And so Abby, when they were filming this movie, she had the opportunity to invite a few friends, a few national pro-life leaders and close friends to come to this behind-the-scenes filming of the movie. And I had the privilege of being invited, and it just so happened that it was being filmed in the town that my birth mother had her abortion. And she still lived 15 minutes from there. And so I had this great idea. I wanted Abby and my birth mother to meet. I wanted my birth mother to hear about this incredible movie and hear what God's done in Abby's life. And so I decided to invite my birth mother. But what I didn't know was that we would be touring an abortion clinic room, like a procedure room like the one she went into at 13 years old and had not been back since. And when we got there, I immediately knew, like, this is bad. This could go very badly. What have I walked her into? But it was too late. The directors were then walking us through this mock-up of an abortion clinic room with all of the instruments, all of the machines, everything like she would have experienced at 13 years old. And my fear was that she would just break down, and she did. And she said things like, Claire, I remember the smells, and I remember the noises, and I remember the pain, and I remember how my baby was taken over there, and I remember my baby's body parts being pieced together over there, and it was horrific. She wept, and I thought, what have I done? I mean, what have I put my birth mother through? There's nothing worse that I could have done in that moment. And I thought, how do I get out of this? How do I redeem this? But before I could finish my thought, I hugged her, but I didn't even know what to say. We walked into this other room after the tour, and it was dinner, and all of us were being treated to dinner, and Abby got up in front of us and talked about how she's so grateful for God's forgiveness for the 8 years she participated in the abortion industry, and how God had redeemed her life, how he had used, turned ashes into beauty, how he had used the evil that she was a part of for something good, because her story truly has changed millions and millions of lives. And my birth mother leaned over to me and she said, Claire, if God could forgive her, I wonder if he could forgive me. And that's why I am so passionate about what we get to be a part of tonight, because Esther House, these other organizations that were up here, they are not just sharing the truth about abortion to save the lives of the babies, but they are caring for the souls of their mothers, that they would know the forgiveness that is available to those who believe and trust in Jesus. And my birth mother has given her life to Christ since then. My birth mother's memories, as she remembered the smells and the sounds and so many things, her memories are similar to those who have had an abortion and will have a late-term abortion. in Ohio. And that is why I agreed to do the ad, to share my story of surviving a late-term abortion here in Ohio and encouraging people to vote no, because I am so desperate that no other woman experiences that pain. Because the look in my birth mother's eyes is something that I will never forget. I can't even fathom the pain that she has experienced. As I began to share my story more, I realized two things. I realized that our apathy and our silence allows women to suffer silently. I can tell you that my family, we were guilty of being apathetic. We were guilty of being silent because we just weren't affected by it that we knew of. For 21 years until I met my birth mother, we never spoke the word abortion. And when we're apathetic and we're silent, we miss grace and an opportunity to be the hands and feet of Jesus. Have you ever asked yourself this question? Why are Christians so uncomfortable with mercy, grace, and forgiveness? I can promise you, well, you've probably noticed it too. Planned Parenthood, the abortion industry, they are not ashamed of who they are. They are screaming from the rooftops, we are here for you. You can come to us. You can count on us. They are united. They are not divided. Planned Parenthood is saying, we're here for you. Why aren't we? Why aren't we screaming it even louder? Why are we so divided? There should be absolute unity against late-term abortion here in Ohio, especially among believers, and in support of women, families, babies, and organizations like Esther House. Absolute unity. Nobody should be confused on where that we stand. Everybody should understand that we are united. But right now they don't. I have the privilege of being mom to 4 kids. My husband and I have 4 children together. And 3 of my children have birth mothers. And my 10-year-old, her name is Sadie June. Maybe that's another Texas stereotype, I don't know. But Sadie June is 10, and she is my only biological daughter. And when she was 5 years old, we were driving down the road, and her sweet little voice spoke up and said, Mom, what about my birth mother? And I told her that she wasn't adopted, that she didn't have a birth mother, and she told me that her feelings were hurt, that she felt left out because she wasn't adopted. And I told her, well, really you do, and you do have a birth mother, and I'm sorry to disappoint, But the day that she was born, I remember holding her in my arms for the first time and realizing the miracle of her life. Because the reality is that she wouldn't be here if I hadn't survived my birth mother's abortion. My little girl is the picture, the definition of the domino effect of abortion in our culture. Because it never just affects that one woman. It never just affects that one child. It affects generation after generation after generation. But we could say it the other way too. She is also the picture of the impact of one person saying yes, one person willing to get uncomfortable, one organization that is impacting women in the community like Esther House. She is the picture of how that one woman who is touched, one woman who is helped, one baby that is saved, that the generational impact of that is greater than anything we can fathom right now. And it's so exciting for me to get to be a part of what y'all are doing in your community, because our willingness right now, our unity right now, our willingness to get behind an organization that is changing and saving lives, it is going to impact generation after generation after generation. And so I don't know what stepping out of your comfort zone looks like for you. I know what it looks like for me. But I know that God is trustworthy. And I know that however he asks you tonight to step out of your comfort zone, you can trust the God that goes before you because he sees the bigger picture when you don't. And so often we come to events like this and we think, yeah, we're going to hear a great story. And I mean, we've heard incredible testimonies. We've heard very informative information that is very helpful when we go to the polls. But you get to choose. You get to choose how uncomfortable you're willing to get. And even if you came with a plan of, I'm just going to listen, I'm just going to be informed, or I'm going to get involved in this way, or I'm going to give this much, I just want to ask you to trust God. Set those things aside and ask him how he would have you serve, how he would have you give, how uncomfortable he would have you get. Because from experience, God's plans are bigger and better. And so I want to end on one last story of hope. I know that my story is hard to hear, but I wanted to share it in the way that I have tonight because I want you to know what is at stake truly with your vote, with your willingness to be vocal with your friends, with your communities, because it is life or death for somebody like me. I always imagined the first time my birth mother would come to see me speak, and I thought it would be according to my plans. But I should have known better because God's plans are always bigger and better. But I had an organization, a pregnancy resource center in Nashville, call me 2 days before I was supposed to go keynote their fundraiser. And they said, "Surprise, Claire, we found your birth mother and we're bringing her in to see you speak." And I have to admit to you, I was pretty upset, maybe angry, felt very taken advantage of, thought there's no way that I could get through a talk looking my birth mother in the eye, telling our story, seeing that pain again. I couldn't imagine it. So I called my parents like I do in my moment of crisis, and I told them what had happened, and my dad said, "Claire, yes, you have every right to be upset. You have every right to say no. If you want to, absolutely say no, that's too much for me, but pray about it. Imagine what God will do if you're willing." And I hung up the phone like, dang it, I know what I have to do. So I did. I said, okay, she can come, and she did, and it happened exactly how I thought it would, and she wept in the front row. And it was the hardest talk I have ever given to this day. But afterwards, I got to introduce her to the audience, and something happened in the room that night because the pain that I saw in her eyes in that front row, she came up and she started walking towards me, and she still had tears streaming down her face, but she had the joy of the Lord on her face. And she grabbed my hand and she raised our hands up together as if to say victory. And this was our victorious moment. I knew as we stood there that we were victorious over what late-term abortion had done to us, what it had taken from us, how it had hurt us in incredible ways. Because as I stood there with my birth mother, I knew I was no longer the reminder to her of what had happened to her at 13 years old in an abortion clinic room. But instead, I was the reminder to her of what God had done in our lives, how he had redeemed, healed, and restored our relationship, and how he was using our pain to expose truth and to heal the hearts of so many people. And so we were victorious in that moment. And tonight, we are also victorious, even though we are living in this culture that seems so hopeless, even though we are facing things that we shouldn't have to face, bills that we shouldn't even have to vote on. We are victorious because we know that one day Christ will come back and he will make all things new and right. But until that day comes, you get to choose to be that type of person who stands for truth. Thank you. we get to choose to be that type of person who stands for truth, who prays about things that matter daily, who's bold in how you serve and love, who does not compromise or remain apathetic when it's life or death for someone like my twin, someone like me, who stands in the gap for women and children, who steps out of your comfort zone, who votes no to late-term abortion in Ohio, and who gives generously tonight to the life-saving work of Esther House and supports the other organizations in your community that are offering hope. And so I want to ask you tonight that one question my parents asked me. Can you imagine what God will do if you're willing? Thank you so much for having me.